noches. It is great to join you, whether you're watching us live or you are viewing us or listening to us either before or after the job fair. We're great to have you join us. This evening's conversation is the opportunity to connect with and listen to candidates, former candidates in some cases, and current independent school professionals who were also independent school alums. And so it's full circle moments for these incredible panelists that we have this evening. My name is Liz Fernandez. I have been in independent schools for over 32 years. I am also an independent school alum, and I'm the parent of an independent school alum, which is wild. And I am really excited to dive into this conversation. In a moment, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and they already know that periodically I'll toss out a question that either of them, whoever's moved to respond to first, can. And if you all have questions that you would like me to ask the panelists, by all means, please send them directly to me using the chat if you are viewing us live. And if you happen to be listening after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out at jobfair@nysais.org. I am happy to support you in your journey, especially if it's after the job fair, because I know that that can be a little bit of a challenge. So I want to make sure that you have the support that you need at all times. And with that, panelists, if you could please introduce yourselves, let us know where you graduated from, how long you had been a student there, where you currently work, in what capacity, how long have you been there, and what is the kind of school that you work in. So whoever wants to go first, by all means.
Please, Sakai, go.
Sure. Hi, my name is Sakai Troxel, and I am an alum of the Nightingale Bamford School. It's an all-girls school, kindergarten through 12 on the Upper East Side. I attended Nightingale from 7th to 12th grade and through Prep for Prep, which some of you may be familiar with. I am currently serving as the Director of Community Culture and Belonging at International School of Brooklyn, which is a pre-K through 8 IB International Language Immersion School in the Carroll Gardens section of Brooklyn. And this is my 5th year at ISB. Cover all your questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Johnny Cook. I'm currently at the town school. This is, I believe, my 14th year at the town school. Town school is a nursery 3 through 8th grade school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I'm a science teacher. I've been a science teacher my whole time here. I started my journey in independent schools back in 1990. I went to Horace Mann up in Riverdale. I only went to Horace Mann for high school.
Salsa, can you report to the lobby? Felipe from Salsa.
Sorry.
To the lobby.
I'm sitting in the town school right now. So that's, some of us don't like to go home. That's what I'm doing. I like to stay all night. So went to Horace Mann from 90 to 94 for high school. I ended up at Horace Mann through the Albert G. Oliver program, which is now the Oliver Scholars Program. But back then it was the Albert G. Oliver Program. And I, got tapped from a public school here in the city, in New York, and it was my Latin teacher in 8th grade that told me about Oliver, and that's how I ended up.
Well, I would love, because you both came to our schools through specific programs, I want to note for those that are listening that your circumstances involved being part of a cohort and having check-ins and all of those pieces. There are many students of color who come to our schools who are not associated with a Prep for Prep, an Oliver Scholars, or an Albert G. Oliver program, or any of the other early steps, or any of the other placement and educational access programs. And I also want to note that responses to questions that I pose are Sakai and Johnny's individual experiences, not necessarily the experiences of every Prep for Prep student or every Oliver Scholars student, or even people who share some of the same identities that you do. So I'm framing that so that I can take you back. I can take you back to when you were an independent school student at Nightingale and at Horace Mann. What are some of the highlights that you remember as an independent school student? What were some of the key exchanges or moments that you really cherished about that time as a student? Johnny.
Sure. I would say I've said it probably my entire career, but the thing that I got most out of my horseman experience is people. Um, like the biggest part of my time was the connections that I made with the people that I'm still friends with now. Um, there's a chunk of us who went from Horace Mann to Wesleyan, and then from Wesleyan into independent schools. And so there's like a little crew of us that literally have been kind of attached at the hip for way too long a time. And so the thing that easily the thing that I got out of the experience that most often comes to mind, especially positively, is my connections to people. I can remember the first person that I met, Victor Figueroa, who welcomed me at the cafeteria up on the hill at Horace Mann, and literally like just welcomed me in. I came in as a ninth grader. There have been a bunch of kids that came to Horace Mann through Prep for Prep in seventh grade, so they'd already been there for a few years. So they'd already known the lay of the land. I came completely ignorant of independent schools, like totally ignorant that they existed. I had taken specialized high schools tests. I was planning to go to Brooklyn Tech or maybe stay in my junior high school for another year of ninth grade and then apply again to specialized high schools. I did not know that independent schools existed in New York at the time. Like it was just I was totally ignorant until the Oliver program came along and sort of opened me up to the world. So when I ended up at Horace Mann, I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what independent schools were in any real sense. So um, to think back now, especially my whole career being in the schools, to think of how green I was coming into it is really something. And to think that there were people who just looked out for me right away. Uh, and I, I try to pay that forward as much as I can because because I know what it was like. I just know what it was like to come in raw and not understand what it was to be in the school and understand what to do in the situations. And I just had a really solid cohort of people across the grades who really looked out for me and continued to look out for me my entire time that I was there. Could looked out for me to, help me make my decision about college. Same for how I ended up being an independent school teacher. Like I am firmly in independent schools because of the people that I met in independent school. Like it's how I had still ended up in this world. So I can say more, but I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my answer would be pretty similar. I had to kind of look back really recently. We're doing a student conference. We're in the middle of a student conference at school right now, that we do for our entire middle school called Power Play every year. It's a different social justice topic. This year it's about gender equality and gender rights. I'm their keynote tomorrow morning. And so I'm taking them on a evolution journey of my own like gender kind of like experience and the ways in which it plays with like all girl schools and things. So I actually just revisited all of this. Um, and I would say people, I would say classmates and also their families, which was something that was a little bit unexpected. Uh, I had lots of peers who were entering independent schools at the same time as I was, and they all had wildly disparate stories. And admittedly, I had some a little older than me that also had disparate stories, and so I was a little nervous, but I was happy and I was grateful to find at Nightingale that the peers in my class and in the grade right above me and even in the grade right above that really all really welcomed me with open arms uh, and I never felt the push and pull of the difference in the way that I know it existed for a lot of other kids. And I'm glad that Liz qualified the whole like this is my particular experience because I always qualify it that way too. Because I had other peers at Nightingale who had a different experience, but my particular experience was not that. Um, and their families made me feel comfortable in their homes and everything. I never felt othered in that way, in that by them. Now, I did have a few experiences with faculty, which we can get into later on, um, but people are what I hold on to now, even still, and I think the girls, if we were all in the same room together, our 25th anniversary, um, a high school reunion is this year, which is wild to me, and we're all on a chat now. We Most of us have not seen each other in 2 decades, and it's just like we were all in the senior lounge again. And, I think that's the beauty of these spaces is that they do they do foster that kind of community in that way that you can kind of drop it and pick it right back up. And it is the difference that I know my family was looking for me in my education. And as people who had a lot of family members work in the DOE over generations and generations. They just knew that the public schools, even when they want to, just don't have the capacity to sometimes provide that. So yeah, people, yeah, for sure.
Well, and also Sakai, one of the things that ends up happening is that, I forget who says when you know better, you do better,
Yeah.
so to speak. And I think the exposure to the incredible academic and learning experiences, the ways in which curriculum helps us to expand our own thinking and our own learning process. Um, Independent schools just are different. They are different, and there are some, as a Head Start kid and the product of um, public schools until sixth grade, I went to an incredible public school that really not only taught me some of the basic fundamentals in reading and writing and speaking. Um, I was really quite lucky. And as a parent, many years later, I reflect on my own learning experience, and I will always wonder what could have been had I been to an independent school much earlier in my life. I went to one for high school, and um, it was happenstance, and it was in a different country, and so it's a whole different layer of different experiences. Um, Watching our son go through the process, my spouse and I knew better in terms of what we wanted to provide for him differently than what was provided for us. And as a first gen kid, I'm grateful for the path that I had. It taught me a great deal. And it's paved for where I am today. And as a parent, who had already been working in independent schools, I knew the kind of learner and the kind of leader, the kind of global citizen, to use a term that we like to toss around, but like seriously, my son
Yeah.
also happens to be studying abroad right now and has already been to 4 different countries, and it's only week 4. So something was done right. But anyway, I digress. You started to allude to some of the challenges that you experienced as a student, and I know that these exist in all schools for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it's
Yeah.
about the identities that we carry, and sometimes it's about other interpersonal dynamics.
Sure.
So again, I'm naming that. I'm
Yeah.
curious for both of you to talk about some of the challenges that you experienced as a student. But the caveat is where an adult was particularly helpful, because as we think about the value of this time for candidates who are listening, they are stepping in to be those adults that are going to make that difference to little Johnny who walks in on day one, to ninth grade version of Sakai or the seventh grade version of Sakai, or whatever it is. So that's the question. What were some of the challenges that you experienced as a student where an adult was particularly helpful?
Um, since I kind of led into it, I I'm gonna turn your question on its head a little bit because I have to say, and this is a different time, okay? Um, right, Johnny, I think Johnny knows where I'm headed with this. Um, there were no helpful adults. Um, and that's just the truth of it, right? And I think we know better now and we do better now. And I
Mhm.
think that's why roles like mine, for example, exist, is because there's a real concerted effort that being made to make sure that there are safe people and safe spaces for when these types of things do happen. Um, because honestly, when things like that did come up at Nightingale, as someone who was on scholarship, and I felt like I had to eat it a little bit because I felt like my scholarship would get taken away. That's kind of the thing in the back of your head. And I was already the kind of like loud one, so I already had that tag. Liz knew me when I was a kid, so Liz knew that was pretty valid. Um, but
Proper loud or just labeled loud?
a little bit of both. I mean,
Okay.
but like understandably loud, like
Yeah, yeah,
rightly
yeah. No doubt.
loud.
Mhm.
Um, I will say though, and as an anecdotal to that, one of my advisors was actually the headmistress. This is how dated this is, right? The headmistress at Nightingale,
Mhm.
um, who I'm still friends with to this day. Uh, and when all of the black ats popped up,
Mhm.
she called me and she was really upset and she was just like, Sakai, please tell me none of these things happened on my
Mhm.
watch with you because you and I had an open pipeline. Um, and we had a really deep conversation and I was just like, yeah, they did. And she was devastated, and I told her why I didn't open up about it and it was a really like huge learning moment for her, I think, that even though I had this open conversation and open pipeline with her, I still didn't feel comfortable sharing, and so I'd say her learning on that was that she felt like she didn't express that she was safe. And so what I would express to the candidates is, right, the importance of making sure that you, when you're in these spaces, are putting yourself out there as someone who is open and safe to students. And not just kind of like resting on the laurels of maybe identifying with them culturally, for example, because that doesn't necessarily mean a student identifies you that way, right? These spaces can be super challenging and there's a lot of pressure and weight, and you don't know how a student arrived. You don't know what a student is dealing with when they arrive and while they're there and when they're walking those halls. Um, and and so you want to make sure that they feel like there is a space and an opportunity for them to connect with you privately and divulge those more vulnerable moments that they might be having. And it's critical to their success um, because not all of them are have the kind of self-concept developed to really survive those moments without it. So,
I feel like your language is fantastic because I think survive is a very good, a very apt word to describe my experience too. I would sort of piggyback. I didn't mean to cut you off if you still want to
no,
say
no,
it.
no, no, it was perfect. Yeah.
So, like I started at Horace Mann in 1990. So I also want to acknowledge it was a different world, right? Pre-social media, pre-September 11th, pre all kinds of things, right? So the world that I entered schools into was a different version of schools than the 2026 version of schools. And I would say the hardest thing for me in prepping for this was trying to think of an example of adult support
Yeah.
that I truly considered adult support as opposed to just kind of pigeonholing something into that space. And that's why I lead with my peers because I feel like the thing that helped me to make it through Horace Mann were my friends. That's how I got through school. Um, it was, I had some wonderful adults at the school who were very well-meaning and wanted to be as helpful as they possibly could. And I think 1990s versions of independent schools were not about inclusion.
Yeah.
They were about
Being
uh,
multicultural.
they were about assimilation.
Yeah.
They were about having people come into a space to be um, to acclimate to the space itself, not necessarily about the space becoming something that we are a part of.
Yeah.
So I feel like the assimilation was very much an apt term back then because it was, shedding my public schoolness, shedding my blackness, shedding my urbanness, shedding my poverty, right? Like shedding all the things that were parts of me to become what the school sort of projected. Um, and I don't think that's what schools would even, I think that would make schools feel very uncomfortable today if that was a thought that was associated with them. Like I think we've come a long way in this chunk of time, right? Um, so I want to acknowledge that, but it was a hard experience because I didn't know what I was getting into. And so that just to give an example of a story, ninth grade English class, I can remember my English teacher talking about the fact that based on what we were doing in ninth grade English, we would be prepped and ready to take the English, I think it was the English SSET. Remember when you had the subject specific tests,
Mhm.
standardized tests? So I was like, that would be good. Kept talking about it, kept talking about it. I was like, oh, that's cool. What she didn't ever say out loud was that we had to individually register for the exam. Now, I came from public schools. Every standardized test I'd ever taken had been something that was administered by the school. So I didn't even think about the thought that that was a thing I'd had to sign up for. Like I never would have had in my head that I need to sign up for a test because I've never had to sign up for a test before, right? And I'm assuming from her end, she never would have said out loud that you have to sign up for a test because there was no assumption that people didn't know that. Right. So that just little things like that, that weren't even, there's no intentionality there to sort of keep me on the outs. It's just a question of what you know and what you don't know, depending on your community. Right. So just all the things that were like that happened where, um, like when I was at Watkinson, we called it Watt Speak. At town, we talk about it as, our town language, the things that we use. I'm sure every school that y'all have been at, there's that version of speak that's like the things that we know internally in the building that we talk about and the ways that we talk about things that people on the outside have no idea what we're talking about, but we think it's just normal speak for everyone. The expectations for of the norms of the community that are now in my head norms for a community that I know are not norms. They just happen to be the norms for the communities that I've been in, um, and how how powerful the impact of not knowing is. And plenty of adults, I would say, that wanted to be, when I said before, they wanted to be helpful, like they wanted to reach out, but they don't know what I don't know either. So trying to figure out what questions that might even be asked, trying to figure out how to formulate a question that would make sense. And that's separate from blatant moments of like just like problematic ignorance that would lead to um, highly uncomfortable conversations that I had throughout my high school time with different teachers. Like I had a teacher who openly questioned my ability to write just because she hadn't seen my writing before, right? And it wasn't anything other than that. Like her initial thought was plagiarism just because she hadn't seen my writing before. And so she went to my English teacher to ask if this is how I write. And I guess I understand that to a certain extent, right? Like I don't trust my students, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like who trusts students automatically, right? Like young people, what do? You don't trust them right away, right? Like we all, like people are people, right? So you take that with a you take what people say with a grain of salt always. But I still remember that, like, it's been quite a long time since that moment, but it's a moment that helps me to remember what I experienced in prep schools. But and alongside that, let me say, I also had an absolutely wonderful assistant head of school who was constantly looking out for us and trying to find ways to make people feel included. Like his name was Randall Castleman. He's passed now. Uh, but we walked out for Rodney King, and that was spearheaded by students, right? Not surprisingly, students of color, but still students spearheaded a student walkout for Rodney King, and Castleman supported our decision to walk out. He easily could have said, "Hey, we appreciate your energy, but we need to stay contained and stay in school." And no, we like walked out of the building onto campus, and we had like a proper walkout. And so I thought that happened too. Um, so um, there are lots of stories for me that lean towards the absence of support from adults, but there are also stories that I can hold on to that relate to people looking out for me. I can remember that I should say this because it's unfair to my teacher to not say it. Like after she was told that it was my writing, she apologized. Right. So it's not like she didn't apologize for the assumption that I didn't do the work. But of course, I'm a kid. I remember the fact that you didn't think I knew what I was doing. Like that's the thing that I hold on to more than the
Or memory
uh,
now.
yeah, exactly. And it just like memories are, like that's one that stays core because I remember it often. You know what I mean? Like I have
Yep.
enough
Right.
opportunities to like
Yeah.
cycle back to it. So it's one that stands out. There are probably a million other versions of moments where teachers. I had an English, sorry, a European history teacher um, who was constantly looking out for me because I was also a knucklehead when I first got there, right? Like I didn't have free periods before, so I would just chill in the cafeteria and hang out with my friends and not go to classes until I learned how to do what it was to do independent school, right? That level of independence wasn't real in my life before. I had a scheduled class before in every period, so just the idea of having free time was not in school was not a thing I was used to, and I took time to acclimate to that. And my European history teacher, ninth grade, who was maybe in her second year of teaching, possibly her first, constantly was looking out, constantly was trying to figure out how to get me to get into her first period class, you know.
These
Um,
stories just just your recollection and the fact that I can watch the two of you make connections on your own lived experience. Um, they inform who we are and they inform how we approach the work that we do. There are a few questions that come in, that have come in, and I want to recognize that for both Sakai and Johnny, there was also a comment that knucklehead, I forget exactly what you said, Sakai, about
Loud.
loud, warranted, unwarranted, etc. The statement was change agent. And in many ways, at a time where schools did not necessarily have the understanding that I hope many would say we have today. And still in evolution, not saying that there's an arrival and an evolution. Um, but I want to fast forward in our second half hour to what was your professional journey like? So, what made you return to teach in an independent school? Because you have these stories that anchor you, and that helped you survive. And at some moments, you also are acknowledging that you were thriving. I mean, you were both brilliant, thoughtful, dedicated young leaders who, I mean, I know that. And that's led to your dedicated role as incredible leaders and teachers and educators in our schools. So, what was your professional journey like that created the returning to school? And then, when you both briefly answer that, then I have a bunch of questions that have come in that I want to engage you with.
that's right.
Yeah. So admittedly, I did not want to work in independent schools at first, like at all. So I had a hard stop. It's like not
Mhm.
doing that. Um, there are kids who need me more. And so I spent a good chunk of my career in nonprofits, for a long time. And then I would like tinker a little bit and I'd kind of do some consultant work with some independent school families, mostly families of color who were kind of like hearing about my work and were like, we don't connect with the people who work at our independent school, and we hear you're really great with independent schools and independent school families of color. And so that kind of started drawing me back in. Um, and then uh, uh, a mentor of mine who's an older prep for prep alum and also is assistant head of school at another independent school in Baltimore, Priscilla Morales, got in touch with me about another independent school BIPOC legend around these parts, uh, about a, a director of DEI role at the school I'm at now. Um, and I laughed because I thought all DEI roles in independent schools were fluff and that they don't let you do any work. And so she had to verbally spar with me a little bit about it. And then she had to remind me of kind of some of the stories that Johnny and I just shared. And also of all the things I loved about independent school at the same time. And I kind of had a little bit of an existential crisis where I was like, well, two things can be true at the same time, right? So there are these kids who really need me on the outside. And then there are also these kids who need me on the inside because I remember what it's like to not have a B. And that sucked, right? That was really crappy. And how different could that experience have been? I had a great time in independent school, but I was also a very self-assured kid. And I was a change agent, like I started GSA at my school. I don't know, I effed a lot of stuff up at my school for good. But
Hmm.
but not everyone,
Rabble rouser,
not everyone, not
Trailblazer.
right, right.
trailblazer.
But not
Yeah,
everyone, not
yeah, yeah.
everyone's like that.
Pioneer.
And so, you know, what can these spaces look like when people are unafraid to challenge systems, right? And she promised me that this was a school where I would be able to do that. So I took the job. And so this is actually my first independent school full-time role back like in these spaces as an employee. So it's interesting, and I think it's a good culture fit for me. It feels very different than the independent schools that I know. Um, and it feels like a good fit and match. My role has evolved from being just about DEI to being what I call DEI plus. So I do all of the DEI work, and I also now do a lot of the community outreach, and I do a lot of the kind of like writing of policies and building of systems that are around kind of our parents and our family connections and the ways in which we engage with others and between ourselves and things like that. And so um, I love it. I think it has come a little full circle. I think instead of breaking systems, I'm now building them, which my headmistress thinks is very entertaining as someone who sat in her office a couple of times. But I think it's needed, and I know my kids are very happy to have someone like me around who they feel like is more relatable um, to them and who can strike that balance of being relatable, but also being an adult, right? And being able to explain to them why systems are important, um, and why you need to follow them, but why it's also okay to challenge them the right ways. And so I realized that this is my purpose. And so, yeah.
Johnny, how about you?
It's funny. It's funny to hear you say that, Sakai, because I feel like you we're almost like bookends of this of what I think of this world. Because my only career has been in independent schools. I graduated college in May 98 and started my prep school journey as a professional in September 98. And I've been in prep schools since. Um, and I I have some of the same sort of feelings and thoughts, but just my path turned out to be different. So I I know it'll seem a little I guess on brand for me to say it, but the way I ended up in independent schools as a teacher is because of people. So some of the same heads that I went to Horace Mann with, we ended up at Wesleyan together. Yeah, a chunk of them are a year ahead of me or 2 years ahead of me, that kind of thing. And I hope it's all right with folks. Like I'm using names because to me it's real people. Do you know what I mean? Like these are actual folks in my head. It's real life. So when I think of these moments, I think of the people themselves as opposed to the experience. So like Jose de Jesus, Javed Khan, Jadid Elliott, Eric Osorio, like those are my boys. They were the ones who were like we didn't all go to Wesleyan together, but a chunk of us ended up at Wesleyan together, right? And I ended up at Wesleyan because I looked at the schools that I got into and said, where can I go that people will be there that I know will look out for me? Like where will that make sense? And so when I was choosing among my accepts, that I ended up at Wesleyan, right? And I don't know what anybody's heard about Wesleyan in the mid to late 90s, but we were fantastic, y'all. Like it was outrageously dope. Like it was the best of times. Like it was just we had this, I don't know what folks think of Wesleyan, but to me, like that
If you were
school,
black and brown and went to independent school, that was the place to go.
you understand, right? Like it was like little New York, little Chicago, little whatever big city, little DC in Middletown, Connecticut. It's just a wild, random little sort of experience. So I had a lot of good people there. I mean, Alewa Cooper and I, same year. Do you know what I mean? Some of the names I mentioned, like these folks are heads of school now. Do you know what I mean? Like the division heads, they're people that have done the DEI gig. Like we're all in the game still, right? So uh, having them as my cohort in college, right? We're all doing the same stuff. We're all months ahead or behind each other. So I'm watching the 93ers go through their process for what they're going to do once they graduate. And I'm like, I can do something like that. So I was Wesleyan didn't have a pre-med major, but I was pre-med, right? So I done all the science track. I was going to go to med school, that kind of thing. Didn't want to go to school right after college and said, oh, I'll teach for a couple of years. What kind of school can I teach? I'm super practical, right? What kind of school can I get a job in? Where can I get a gig? Right? I can get a gig at an independent school because I don't have to have certification to get a gig at an independent school at the time. If I want to get a gig in a public school, I'll have to go through a process. Even in the late 90s, that process that was more welcoming and open because they were trying to get people to be teachers. Even still, I was like, I'm not trying to go through that. I'm not really trying to be in education, right? I'm just going to do this for a couple of years, then I'll go to med school and then be a
Famous last
doctor.
words.
Right, right, like just a couple of years, right? Town school, just a couple of years. You're 15 almost,
Vortex.
right? Yeah, exactly. You just get stuck in, right? Just I'm still spinning right now, right? So I I see the heads ahead of me who do a sort of similar path, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try to do that. So I follow the same systems. I go to Carney Sando and put my stuff in. I go through the interschool program with Annette Lieberson, who was the head at the time, right? And that's how I end up getting my gig at Browning. So that's how I landed as a prep school teacher. I assumed I had taken enough science that I could be a science teacher, so I put my name out there as a science teacher, right? I end up getting this gig. I end up taking over from for a beloved like 30-year vet at Browning who was retiring so that he could go learn like C++ plus plus and like Java because because everybody's a nerd, right? So you're not just going to retire. You're going to retire and go do extra computer programming language work because that's what we do as people, right? And so that his name was Gil Bartlett, super cool dude, looked out for me, even though he wasn't at Browning at the time, but he kept looking out for me, right? So that's how I ended up in prep schools. And I can remember the feeling, I can still see to a certain extent the lab in the science lab that was my lab on my first day of school when the 10th graders first walked in. Browning's a K through 12 boys school. It's one of two K through 12 boys schools here in New York, Collegiate being the other. Um, Browning is Browning will always have a place of love in my heart because that's where I started, right? Like that's my first. That's my like that's the school that took a chance on me when I didn't have anything to prove on paper that I'm me, right? Like I know who I am, but there's nothing out there that you could go and look at that would tell you that I'm me, right? And so the school takes a chance. And so Steve Clement, head of school, recently retired. I would say probably in the last 10 years, Steve Clement retired as the head of Browning. But dude took a chance on me and said, "We'll have you come in. You can take over these classes." And so I came in and was like, "I'm doing it." And I can remember watching the boys enter the lab that first day. And I can remember, I still feel the warmness in my belly thinking about that moment of seeing them come into the room. And I was like, "All right, now, I think I'll be all right. I think I
It's
can do
for
this."
real. It's
Right.
really
And I
happening.
was like, and I'm like, "All right, this is all right." Like like, and that led me to try my best to just try to connect with people, right? I'm not trying to, I never have, I don't think, um, at least the current version of me doesn't feel like I ever had a sense that I needed to be a certain something for the kids, if that makes sense. Like I feel like I'm black always. I'm male always, right? Like these are things that I project and they're also things that I identify as. Like they exist. So whatever way I walk into the space, those things will show up,
Hmm.
right? I'm forthright always. I try to be honest always, right? So like the parts of me are gonna show themselves, and I hope that those things are things that people can connect with.
Johnny, that statement right there leads me to a question that one of our um, listeners posed. And that's that for both of you, briefly, as faculty, do you feel that you have to eat it, that you have to feel that things haven't changed, that they haven't changed on some level in your roles in schools, even with support systems? Do you ever feel like you have to hold back um, in your roles today because things have changed and there's been some evolution? So, like in 45 seconds, how would you answer that question? Because there's a couple that have come in, and I want to make sure that we get to them all, and we've got
Yeah,
15 left.
yeah. I mean, I can jump in super fast for mine. Like,
Right.
of course, I feel like I have to eat it. Like that's to me, that's work, right? They're all kind. If I control the universe, things would look markedly different, but I don't. So I use the platform that I have to make as much noise as I possibly can for the things that I care about. And that's something that I learned over the course of my career. Like I didn't come into my career with the assumption that that's what I was going to be, but I've learned through the experience of being in the space that that's um, who I am. Just to give an example, the People of Color Conference was canceled, right? And I have to eat that, right? The place I would go to find fellowship with the people that I'm looking at, like Liz and I used to see each other all the time at POCC. Part of my reason to go to POCC was to be able to see people like Liz. Thing is canceled by NIS, right? None of us liked it, but we ate it. And eating it didn't mean just leaving it there. It meant trying to come up with other things for us to do, and that's what happened this year, right? But you eat it because we don't get to pull the strings and decide that that's not going to happen. We get to do pull the strings to decide how we're going to respond, but we didn't get to make that decision as a collective, if that makes sense. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Um, I would say I'd agree with Johnny. There's always an element of something you eat at work, right? I mean, that's just bureaucracy. I'm senior admin at my school, so I'd say I eat a little less probably because I get to make a little bit more ruckus than probably like a faculty member does. I get to put up a little bit more fight on things, especially because I write policy. So it's a little different for me in that way. So it's a nice change to be able to say I don't eat as much. Um, but but yeah, I mean, I think that's, these spaces, they're built that way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, public schools are too, right? These are all
Right.
bureaucratic systems. You're gonna
Yep.
eat something no matter where you work. So, I don't know if that's a trick question or not, but
I mean, it does. And look, there's a level of authenticity in terms of having this conversation
right,
that we just have to, there are rules at home and there are rules at work and
right,
there are
yeah,
rules,
yeah,
like,
like,
so we know that.
yeah.
Um, Here's another question. Do you feel the school supports you in the ways you want to support students, given your backgrounds as BIPOC independent school grads? Do you feel that you have to push back? And if so, how does someone navigate that? So, there's that question.
I'll jump in on that one because I'm super proud to say that ISB 1,000% supports all of my foolishness. They back every one of my initiatives. Priscilla Morales, golden ticket. She was 1,000% right. I will follow her off the bridge because she was correct. That place follows they support everything. They have allowed me to move mountains there. When I see something that is a need, they allow me to build it, and it has been lovely. There was literally almost no DEI department when I arrived, so I've built basically everything from scratch. And the only thing that stands in my way is money. So the only time that my head of school says no is if he has to figure out the money. But it's very I they are on board with everything. We're one of the few schools right now that is still kind of like making statements about what's going on. That is still standing 10 toes down about like what's going on in this country. Um, I'm, yeah, yes, support.
Yeah, I definitely feel supported in my role. I've also made some choices too that I think go along with that. Like I made a conscious decision to not go admin in my career because I recognize that the version of me that exists in the world is not the version that's going to be particularly good at um, balancing the reality of what schools are with the things that I want and feeling fulfilled. So just to give an example, like my school costs money, right? And it costs a pretty penny to go here. So there are certain expectations that come just because families are paying a certain amount of money to get through the door, right? And those families don't look like me. So their priorities aren't the things that I think need to be priority all the time, right? And there was a level of, am I going to be okay with having to deal with that part of the admin world, just kind of being all right with that? And I was like, that's not me. Like, I'm not the person that can be okay with that on a like day-to-day basis in the way that I felt like I would need to be if I were to go admin. So I went counseling. I was like, I want to talk to people one on one. I want to be able to be in this. I want to be in a room where we can speak truth to each other's faces. And so when I muck it up, you can say to me, you know, I think you got that right. And then I'm like, all right, no doubt. Let me see if I can reframe it. And so that's the path that I took. So I went out of teaching and into counseling. And then I just came back to teaching because I didn't think I was going to live in Hartford for the rest of my life. Like I love my gig up there. I love what I was doing there, but it was Hartford, Connecticut. No offense to Hartford, Connecticut, but I'm a native New Yorker, right? Like I was a early 30s New Yorker, the single dude trying to figure my life out. It wasn't going to be in Hartford. So I came back to the city and I realized that the gig that I could get more easily was a teaching gig versus a counseling gig because schools are still evolving, right? So like as you say for your school, Sakai, that you hadn't had a diversity person or a program for a chunk. Like I can remember when that gig started in schools, right? And we can remember when support for kids, either learning support, social emotional support, like that kind of stuff, started in these schools. Like these are not things that have existed forever. They've come into being during my career.
Yeah.
So, I didn't think I'd get a job as a counselor, or at least not a job as a counselor in the way that I wanted to do it. So I was like, I can come back and be a teacher, and I stayed on that path. But I also think that I've been in schools a long time, and I know a lot of people, so I feel like I can say stuff that other people can't too. So there's a certain kind of support that I have that's just based on my own lived experience of being in the building. Like I know even if I muck it up, I can go to Liz and she'll make sure I get a job in like 5 seconds,
Well,
right?
you
Like I'm not
are a former job fair candidate.
right. I got my gig at town through the job fair, right? And I came to the job fair because a dude here at town, Eric Chapman, right? For those who know Eric, right? He was here at town as their first director of diversity, or probably diversity coordinator, because that was more
Right.
likely the
The
title at that
language.
point, right? And he and I knew each other because I think he was at Tufts with some of my folks, that kind of thing. And so we
Yeah.
knew each other through the community. And he was here. Matthew Stewart was the head of the upper school here, which is our fifth through eighth grade. Um, Matthew and I had known each other because he was at Spence when I was at Browning. And so I had enough connects and I show up at the job fair. I probably was on a panel that morning, right? Sitting in a room doing the same kind of thing, and then walked into the table chaos and did the walk around, right? And did the thing. And I walked over to town. It was like I got to make sure I go over there and talk. But I knew I was like I'm a black dude who teaches science with a counseling background. I'm gonna get a gig,
For
right? Like
sure.
that's not
For
like I
sure.
wasn't worried about getting a
I
gig,
know
right? I was
I'm
like I'm
sitting here
gonna
like
be able to
figuring
get
out
a
how I can
job.
poach you myself, and I'm like,
Right, but saying like I'm definitely going to get a job, right? Like this, I'm a unicorn, right? Like it's gonna happen. So, but I was like, so I'm looking at places to land, and I feel the same way now. My head now, Doug Brophy, is a dude who looked out for me when he was at Spence, and I was looking at a gig at Spence. He's super tight with my man Jose, who's the head at Dalton. Do you know what I mean? Like it's I don't I feel like I
Yeah,
can go
it's
to Doug and just talk to him, so I don't
whole world
feel
is the whole world is
the
right.
so.
whole world
It's the
is so
relationships.
right.
It's
It's just
definitely
relationships, right?
relationships.
Yeah.
Speaking of relationships, there is one question. Um, so I'm going to read the question as it's been posed,
Uh,
but I also think that we can figure out what we're really trying to get at. Uh, do the two of you think that schools prefer to hire people who have the history within the independent schools, either as former students or they've been parents? Really the question is, how do you leverage that? So, like, let's bring it home in the 5 minutes we have left. Let's really think about what's important for prospective candidates to know about our schools and how you leverage certain elements of who you are. Former independent school student, former, a parent, connected to some working knowledge of what advice would you offer candidates?
I can say something super quick and feel free to jump in, Sakai. I think knowledge of what independent schools are is a useful gem to have if you have it. I think schools care about that because it makes the learning curve easier to traverse. There is a learning curve to being in this world. That's just the truth of it. So if you've had some experience and understand it, it just makes that process um, just a little bit more tenable. Uh, and I'll stop there, let Sakai jump in and we go back and forth. But
Yeah, 1,000%. It is so challenging to acclimate someone who has never been in an independent school to an independent school. So that is a huge plus. I think anyone who possesses the kind of the same core values, right? I'm always looking for someone who's actually done their homework. So it's always noteworthy to me if you have actually done your research on my school. So if you are not saying anything specific about kind of our mission or our values, if you're not in alignment with us in that way, and you're not sharing a little bit of yourself, right? Independent schools are personal. So the thing to know, even if you're not familiar with independent schools, the big way they differ from public is that publics, I feel like, are just looking for credentials, right? But
right.
independent schools want a little piece of you. They want to know who you are as a person. And so if you walk into an interview really rigid in that way, there's a disconnect. And I know when I see candidates and they walk in that way, there's a disconnect for me. I'm looking for someone who's coming to join our community and who is going to connect with not just our students, but with our families, with their colleagues, with our administration, someone who's going to invest in who we are as an institution, right? And who we want to invest in, right? And so in doing that, there's got to be a little transparency about who are you? Where do you come from, right? Like why are you applying to us? What brings you to teaching, right? So think about those things before you enter a room and think about them thoughtfully.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have 2 minutes left, and you've just given so much information, and I want to just recognize the power of your authenticity in this moment, and just how insightful and revealing and thought-provoking I hope this conversation has been, because it's really been a conversation. It's been a conversation across and throughout. I want to thank the people who have joined live and posed questions that were also equally uh, curious and thoughtful. If you are listening whenever, whether live or after the fact, here are a couple of things for you to think about. The applying to independent schools is a process like anything else, and there are going to be different steps. All of these webinars, each one highlights the brilliance of BIPOC educators in our schools that are doing incredible work and leading and making tremendous impact in the lives of young people who deserve quality, thoughtful leadership. And we want to make sure that you understand that along the journey, you're not going to walk alone. As Johnny and Sakai and I have said, there are people along the way that can help you at every stage. So if not this year, come back next year. This is an opportunity for you to learn about independent schools and to see yourselves, hopefully, as part of our community, so that across our schools, we provide opportunities for young people to see themselves reflected in who is teaching and leading them, and we give them opportunities to imagine what the world actually is like realistically. There is work to be done everywhere. There is
Yep.
work to be done in every kind of school, in every community, at every moment. And so wherever your calling is, it is for the right now. And I hope that your calling is to join us on Saturday, February 21st. That's in 2 days, 3 days, at Columbia Grammar and Prep, to explore what it might be like to either change a current school that you're in or pursue joining one of our schools. We're going to have 75 schools that are in attendance. We will have lots of opportunities to support you. It requires you to reach out. We are here for you. Jobfair@nysais.org is the email. It's really me. I promise you I answer. I am so grateful to Sakai and Johnny, to my partners at NYSAIS. Thank you so much, George, for your behind the scenes support, and everyone at NYSAIS for the work that we are doing, to all of our member schools, to everyone who has committed to continuing to walk this journey to ensure that we provide young people and people of all ages with an opportunity to be authentically who they are and to lead in a way with dignity and elegance and grace, and really make an impact and truly, truly consider the impact that they can have beyond 8 to 4, if you will, because none of us think that the day ends at 4 o'clock. Let's be real. We know that Johnny and Sakai haven't gone home yet.
I'm at work right now.
I actually ran home to do this.
Oh, there you go.
I got home like 2 minutes before I logged on.
Excellent. Well, anyway, listen, thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your time and for your talents and for your interests. And I look forward to supporting you and seeing you on Saturday and beyond. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Liz, for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Thanks for putting the
Look at
ship
Liz. She knows it all.
on the water. Keep us going. It's necessary. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.